Part of the appeal of an automatic watch is simply the hands-on interactive quality of it. Pulling the crown out, setting the time, winding it. If you love that, maybe you'll love a watch with 2 crowns twice as much. Or 3 crowns thrice as much. This pilot watch from Bulova offers you a chance for 3 times the hands-on fun. This is the Bulova model number A-15. At the time of this video, you can find this watch on JomoShop for $300 US. Now, JomoShop offered to put together a landing page of the top 15 watches that I am interested in. To be upfront, I haven't seen all of these watches in person. These are just watches that I find interesting. And so far, I've had an opportunity to review 7 of these. This A-15 is one of the watches on that landing page. Now, I'll leave a link in the description below. It is an affiliate link, and if you choose to use it, you will not be charged anything more, but I do get a small percentage that helps out with the channel. Now, I'm a fan of Bulova, but I do admit that I do tend to lean towards her vintage and military-inspired watches. That Bulova hack, in my opinion, is just a beautiful watch. And the Bulova Lunar Pilot, that has a permanent place in my personal collection. You know, I love the fact that not only are they fantastic looking watches, but they are made from a company that has legit military history behind them. The A-15 pilot watch that we're looking at today is based on a prototype that Bulova made back in 1945 for the US Army. Now, there are only about 500 of these ever produced as prototypes. It never actually went into full production. And one of the most interesting things about this watch is the ability to set a starting point and then measure elapsed time from there. Back in the day, pilots used that information to figure out their distance and their speed. But let's face it, today you and I are much more likely to use it to track a second time zone. But it is still a really interesting bit of history and makes this watch kind of stand out and be unique. But let's take a closer look and you can see for yourself. Hey everyone, if you like these videos, please do me a favor and consider subscribing. It would really help out the channel. Now let's get on with the review. The case construction is stainless steel with a diameter coming in at 42 millimeters. For lug-to-lug distance on the side, we have 50 millimeters and an overall thickness of 14 millimeters. Now normally, I would consider 50 millimeter lug-to-lug to be my absolute upper limit. But honestly, I wore this all week and never once thought it's too large. Here it is on my 7-inch wrist. As you can see, it definitely has some presence, but I think it fits just fine. We have a 2-part finish here, a brushed finish on the lower half of the case and the lugs, and a high polished finish on the upper part of the case as well as the case back. There are no chamfered edges, but everything is nicely smooth and finished off here. The brushing is nicely done and it has this satin look to it. The high polished areas are not something that jumps out at you immediately, and in fact, you don't even notice them until you look at the watch from the side. And that's kind of a nice touch. Now the lugs have a nice downturn to them. The underside of the case is not quite as smooth as the top, but there's still nothing that would give you a second thought here. There are no edges or corners anywhere on the watch, which I would refer to as sharp. The first thing that jumped out at me immediately when I saw this watch was the dial. That stark black and white motif is really eye-catching, and the layout is not something I've seen before. Now the second thing that jumped out at me, and this might be obvious, is the fact that there are 3 crowns. But we'll talk more about the dial and crowns later in the video. The case, and the entire watch for that matter, has this classic old school tool watch feel to it, and I would say it's actually quite handsome. 42 millimeters might be on the large size for a lot of people, but keep in mind that this is an aviation style watch, and those always run larger. Turning the watch over, on the back we have not a screw down case back, but a screw on case back. It is literally held on with small screws. Now I believe this might be the first watch I've ever reviewed that has a screw on case back, and I'm not a fan. For the simple fact that I know there's a high probability my hand is going to slip and a screwdriver will scratch the case back when I do need to remove those screws. Plus, the fact that they're so small that nobody over 45 has any business even attempting to remove those things. Now maybe it's just me, maybe 2mm screws are not a concern of yours. Now the case back has a high polish to it, so it will get scratched up quickly. If you can overlook those two things, you'll see that around the case we have text that includes sapphire crystal, stainless steel, and the Bulova logo. Now I also want to point out here that this watch has 30 meters of water resistance, partially due to that screw-on case back and those crowns. Now inside that case, we have the Miyota Automatic Movement 82S6, and that is a 21 joule movement with 21,600 vibrations per hour, a 42-hour power reserve, it does hack, and it does hand wind. Now the accuracy is rated at -20 to +40 seconds a day. In my personal experience on this particular watch, it was running 7 seconds fast per day according to my watch app. At the 3 o'clock position, we have the crown which operates the minute and hour hands. Now it is a signed crown with a Bulova logo. All of the crowns are the same size and are roughly 7mm in width and 3.5mm in depth. And the size makes them very easy to grip and to operate. All of the crowns sit high enough on the case that personally, I never experienced them digging into my wrist. The main crown at the 3 o'clock position is a simple push-pull crown. Pulling the crown out and rotating it hacks the second hand and sets a time. Now the other two crowns do not pull out but simply rotate. The crown at the 2 o'clock position operates the outer minute dial. Rotating it around, we are going to line it up to where the minute hand currently is. The crown at the 4 o'clock position operates the inside dial, and we're going to spin that around to line up with the hour hand. And then if we move the time forward an hour and 5 minutes, you'll see that the hour hand points at the 1 and the minute hand points at the 5 on the corresponding dials. As I said, that is the traditional use, but I expect more times than not, people will simply use the inner dial as a way to keep track of a second time zone. It's a fun little feature that adds a lot to the overall aesthetics of the watch and provides another way to interact with your watch. Now these two dials have a slight slope to them and angle upwards as they move away from the center of the dial. It's subtle, but it adds a little bit of depth. In my opinion, it really helps to elevate the overall feel of the watch. You know, oftentimes the dial on a Pilot watch is completely flat, so it is nice to see Bulova playing a little bit with the traditional approach here. Now if I had one criticism here, it'd be the fact that the two crowns do not pull out or lock down, and you could inadvertently move the dials without realizing it. Now I did not experience this myself, but it is something just to be aware of. Moving on to the face of the watch, inside of those two rotating dials we just talked about, we have a white printed minute track, and inside of that, we have Arabic numbers printed in white on the matte black dial. Now these appear to be done in a raised ink. This stark white on black provides a good amount of contrast, and even in a dim environment, I was able to read the time. The numbers here are not comically large, but they are bold enough that my eye goes straight to them, and I never had any trouble with legibility. Now this is a dial that easily could have been cluttered, but to Bulova's credit, it simply just works. Inside of those white Arabic numbers, we find a second set of numbers, this time in military time and printed in yellow. This helps to add an old school vintage vibe and keeps the second set of numbers from visually competing with the first set. And finally, inside of that, we find the Bulova logo. Now, Bulova is a company that does have a military history behind it. And as I said before, this watch was inspired by a prototype they made for the US Army around 1945. Even though this is not a direct reproduction, to me, that still lends a bit of authenticity to the watch. The running second hand on this watch is nicely sized and meets up with the minute track. There is a small counterbalance here which echoes the shape of the hour hand. Both the minute and hour hand are metallic silver and filled with lume, as is the main Arabic numbers. The minute hand extends nicely into the minute track, and the hour hand is visually different enough that telling the time at a glance is a simple task. On the Bulova website, it does not list what type of lume or how much of it is actually used. I've heard people complain that it's weak, and yeah, it's not the brightest, but in my personal experience, it does exactly what I ask of a watch. Now, for anyone who doesn't know, my everyday lume test consists of wearing the watch, getting an average amount of light exposed to it, setting it on my bedside table, and then seeing if I can read the time at 4 in the morning. In the middle of the night, when my eyes are fully dilated, that is when I want to know if I can read the time. And this watch did pass my everyday lume test. For crystal, this watch comes with sapphire crystal and anti-reflective coating. In my personal experience, I found the performance outside to be fair. Not great, not terrible. In part due to that black dial. While the black dial provides good contrast in most situations, outside, black dials seem to be more prone to reflections. And that brings us to the leather strap. This is one of the nicest leather straps I've seen, and at the same time, I'm disappointed in it. But first, let's get the basics out of the way. The strap is 20 millimeters wide at the lugs and tapers down to 18 at the last adjustment hole. On the backside, it is stamped with the words Genuine Leather and Bulova. The strap feels absolutely fantastic. It is soft and flexible and has a cushiony feel to it. It's not a solid color, but instead has this dark brown with a subtle aged look to it. It is roughly 3.5 millimeters thick and has matching color stitching. It's exactly the type of leather strap that you hope for. There are two leather keepers, one is stationary while the other is repositionable. And the buckle itself is signed with the Bulova logo. Now my one complaint here is the placement of the adjustment holes. I have a 7-inch wrist, which I feel is common, at least in the US. And I have to wear the strap on the smallest adjustment hole. So if you have a wrist smaller than 7 inches, this strap is not going to fit you. You're either going to have to get a replacement strap or have additional adjustment holes added to the strap. Now this is actually my biggest con for this watch. Otherwise, it's a really nice watch, but I'm concerned that this one misstep about the adjustment hole placements will keep some people away. So let's go over the specs for this watch. We have a sapphire crystal, the Miyota 82S6 automatic movement, a diameter of 42 millimeters, a thickness of 14 millimeters, lug width 20 millimeters, lug to lug distance 50 millimeters, and finally a 30-meter water resistance. And finally, let's go over the pros and cons. For pros, aesthetics. It is something a little different than most pilot style watches. You get a sapphire crystal, good legibility, the fit and finish, and there's 2 more ways to interact with the watch. For cons, it only has 30 meters of water resistance, there is a screw-on caseback, the placement of the adjustment hose on the leather strap, and those 2 extra crowns. There's no way to actually lock them into place. So my final thoughts on this watch. Now, I love a good pilot's watch. There's just something about it that connects with me. Currently, this watch is selling on the Bulova website for $550, and that's a lot. But this watch has been out for a while, and places like Joma Shop or Amazon are listing it for $300. For a military-inspired pilot watch from a major brand that has history behind it, I definitely would consider this watch. Okay, my friends, that is it. Until the next time, remember, buy whatever it is that you love. This is your watch collection. I'll see you in the next video.